Today's topic is going to be about VRAM. There's a big misconception about VRAM going around, and I want to clear that up, as well as talk about why certain companies have different VRAM configurations for the same card. Stay tuned. First of all, the biggest misconception about VRAM out there is that people will often compare the amount of VRAM on their cards to the games that require VRAM and say, you know what, I see that this game requires 4 gigabytes of VRAM, or that, Shadow of Mordor, for example, requires 5 gigabytes of VRAM. You know what, I probably need a higher VRAM for my card. And instead, I'm going to pick up this 4 gigabyte version of this card instead of the 2 gigabyte version in hopes to play that. Well, this isn't true, because in order to compare VRAM, you should compare VRAM to your card and not to compare the VRAM to the games that you're trying to run. An example of this is, say, the RX 460. There are 2 and 4 gigabyte versions of the RX 460. So if you're trying to play certain games that will require 4 gigabytes of VRAM, getting an RX 460 4 gigabyte version won't allow you to play those games just because you have 4 gigabytes of VRAM. You have to make sure your card is actually powerful enough to run those games at the settings that will take that much VRAM. So you would probably have to turn textures up very high. MSAA would be pretty high to actually utilize the extra 2 gigabytes of VRAM, and the 460 is just not a strong enough card to be able to run AAA titles at those settings and maintain a playable frame rate. Most of the time, you're going to be playing, if you have a 460, you're going to be playing those games at medium or low settings, which probably only use 2 gigabytes max. So getting a RX 460 4 gigabyte, for example, doesn't really make sense if you're using it to try to play games that require that much VRAM. The same applies for other cards such as GTX 960, 2 and 4 gigabyte versions, GTX 680, 2 and 4 gigabyte versions. All of these cards have 2 and 4 gigabyte versions, and a lot of people pick up the higher VRAM version, just because they want to future-proof themselves, or they see that certain games nowadays are using more and more VRAM. They want to make sure that they can play them games. However, a lot of the times you're limited more so by your card's processing capability rather than VRAM. So this brings to the different question. Why do graphic card companies make 2 and 4 gigabyte versions or different VRAM configurations for the same cards? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them is consumerism. Think about it from a business point of view. For very, very little costs, all it takes is putting different VRAM modules on the exact same GPU. Graphics card companies such as AMD and Nvidia can essentially create multiple lines of the same product at different price points to capture a wider variety of the consumer. So for example, let's say the RX 460 2 gigabyte version is about $100 and the RX 460 4 gigabyte version is about $120. So now, by doing nothing more than just changing the VRAM configuration on your GPU, you've essentially created 2 different product lines that will attract people who want to spend $100 on a graphics card, as well as people who want to spend $120 on a graphics card. So you've essentially increase your potential consumer base. Now, the second and more prominent reason is that they create different VRAM configurations of the same card to keep in mind that a lot of people buy those cards to run them in SLI or Crossfire configurations. And when you run two of the same cards in Crossfire or SLI configurations, you are using essentially only the VRAM of one card. So if you are, for example, crossfiring 2 RX 480s, you're only using, the VRAM of a single RX 480. That's why there is an 8 gigabyte version of the RX 480, is so that people can crossfire them and not be limited to the 4 gigabytes of VRAM, even though for a single RX 480, 4 gigabytes is probably more than enough for 1080p gaming. Nvidia has done the same thing in the past with their GTX 960s, the GTX 770s, or the GTX 680s. All of these cards had different VRAM configurations of 2 or 4 gigabytes depending on whichever one you wanted, and it's because in case that people want to run them in SLI configurations. Now you might be wondering, but wait, what about the GTX 1060, right? The 1060 has 2 different VRAM configurations, the 3 and the 6 gigabyte. Yet, you can't SLI them. In fact, Nvidia has specifically stated that they do not want their new 60s and below series cards to be SLI capable, and they're moving away from SLI in general. Now, what Nvidia did in this case is that they still want to have 2 different VRAM configurations for the reason I mentioned before. So how they did this was that they disabled 10% of the CUDA cores on the 1060 3GB version, and the 1060 6GB version had 10% more CUDA cores. By doing that, they gave customers a reason to buy both the 3GB version and the 6GB version. If you care only about getting the best performance for your dollar, and you don't care about future-proofing, and you only want to play at 1080p, and you don't care about turning everything to the Supermax settings, then you can get the 1060 3GB version, which is a pretty good bang for your dollar, because it is 25% cheaper than the 1060 6GB version and is only 10% weaker as long as you're not being constrained by your VRAM. But there are a lot of people, like myself included, who want to future-proof and who are not, really comfortable with only 3GB of VRAM. Then people like us, we're going to buy the 6GB version of the 1060 and willing to spend 25% more for only 10% performance, but being able to, ensure that 6GB of VRAM is going to be enough, even years into the future for 1080p gaming. So that is what Nvidia did to basically maintain the diversified VRAM configurations of the 1060 in order to maximize sales while disabling SLI on them. And for the 1050, obviously, they made 1050 and 1050 Ti, which is a completely different processing capability. And they really should have made the 1060 and the 1060 3GB, maybe call it 1060 Ti for the 6GB version. But, Nvidia, they kind of didn't. So I don't know. Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you didn't, be sure to hit that dislike button and then tell me why so I can improve, because, as always, I want to get better. I want to make better videos that more people enjoy, so help me out there. Thanks for watching and have a great day.